Civilization collapse. What is that about? Let's perhaps just start with this beautiful little quote. Mark, give it to them.
Barbarism is the natural state of mankind. Civilization is unnatural. It is a whim of circumstance. Barbarism must always ultimately triumph.
Yes, thanks, man. Okay, I would hope, or I would sincerely hope actually, that each of you knows this quote from Beyond the Black River. And in this citation, we have basically Howard's work fully expressed. Barbarism, an essential feature of Howard's work. And this once again goes hand in hand with Howard and his critical stance on civilization. Howard actually deconstructing civil. Oh, okay. I was just worried there was some kind of TV game. Howard deconstructing civilization. And today, what I'd like to show in my presentation is how the main characters in Howard's stories basically shed their civilized layer and let loose of their primeval self, their barbarian self, and in order to survive their adventures. And before we go in this, I think we should probably have a short chat about this topic, barbarism. I guess if we talk about barbarism, at least the image I had a long time due to depiction in pop culture is basically this. Okay, half-naked bodybuilders wielding rather nasty weapons, enjoying and happy killing each other off. Yes, that's the general image. Unfortunately, this is, or fortunately for us, this is totally wrong. Wrong. No, okay, I don't want to say this. And Howard was a way too much smart man to have such a simple image. Howard's image of barbarism was something totally different and much more differentiated. For Howard, barbarism was a state of mankind, race of people before they became civilized, developed into civilization. Civilization, on the other hand, would make people weak, decadent, and even more horrible, would, according to Howard, take away their personal freedom. On the other hand, for Howard, barbarism was a life that took place in a harsh and hostile environment, and in spite of the hardships of barbarism, barbarism offered men the opportunity to live a hard, dangerous, even violent, but on the other hand, natural and, dare I say, fulfilled life. And this image of barbarism is certainly based on the classic barbarians, the Germanics or Germans. I'm not such a barbarian anyway. And be a barbarian, yeah. But more on life at the Texas frontier, the old frontier. And that was an era which Howard went on record to say, I would have rather wished I had lived in this time. And for Howard, this Texas frontier life, that meant basically more honest people, a certainly simpler lifestyle, no freedom-infringing artificial laws. I'm making this really short because this goes much deeper, but I want to stay in the time, and Jeff is already like looking at me as if he wants to do something nasty to me. But to give a quote from Howard, from letter to H.P. Lovecraft. The old frontier meant freedom from crushing taxes, crowds, the hustle and rush of urban life, the monotony of the sweatshop or the office, the same routine, snobbery, and being merely a cog in the machine, which is a rather modern way to think. Actually, I dare anybody here saying that he never felt the same way. Now, this idea of barbarism, one should not say that Howard was naive about that, or that he saw this in a totally glorifying light. Howard had actually quite a realistic image. He actually said that barbarism was not such a cool life. He said the barbarian was actually not free. A barbarian was subjected to superstition, which made his life pretty miserable. He was also subjected to the word of his leaders, like a witch doctor or shaman, that could, out of a mood, just kill this barbarian. So Howard was pretty honest about it and said barbarism was certainly not something that was cool. But it was Howard's preferred state of mankind. We have him on letters where he said, okay, I can't make myself understood, but this is just, I like this way of life. This is how it is, and I can't explain it. Just take it or leave it. And that's also pretty important. Howard never, ever said barbarism is better than civilization. He actually wrote, civilization is certainly best for mankind, but not for all, for people like me. So, but otherwise it's actually pretty good. And he also never regarded barbarism as superior. That's an image which, or wrong image, which many people actually are having. So here, once again on record, Howard never said barbarism, it's better. And now let's come a little bit to my topic, civilization. As I already mentioned, civilization was for Howard an artificial, contemporary state that just couldn't last. And in his stories, he took his readers, in order to show this, he took his readers to isolated places like swamps or primeval forests like the piney woods. Rusty wrote an awesome paper about that. Thank you very much. I read it, it's helped a lot. And in these places, a civilization doesn't stand a chance. Civilization, this means intruders from the outside, and barbarism, barbarism, wilderness, savagery, they clash here. And that's where civilization is losing. Okay, Mark, give it to them again, please.
The stillness bore heavily upon me. I seemed to sense in the blackness about me the spirit of the unconquerable swamplands, the primitive foe of man whose abysmal savagery still defies his vaunted civilization.
So here we have a perfect description where it shows civilization does not have a chance here. And he shows this effect actually pretty interesting. There's a pretty controversial story, Black Canaan, and here we can actually see the effect of this of wilderness savagery on the white people living there. In Black Canaan, there are white settlers living in such an environment, and when there is the fear of an uprising of African Americans living in these swamps, these white settlers, they do not call for outside help from police or military. These guys have become barbarians in themselves. They are like a tribe, like a community that doesn't want to have anything else to do with other people. And what they do is they raise their own call for arms, which somehow reaches people on the outside. The main character of that story is, I think, in New Orleans by that time, and he somehow gets word of that trouble, and he rushes back. And these guys even have some kind of fast-tracking system where they have horses on the way so that these guys can actually return faster. So this is really an isolated tribe. And okay, and with this, that's the effect on the people living there. Then Howard shows often that civilized space in these places is so on its way out. Perhaps the first quote, it's a beautiful passage.
The house had once been a mansion of the old colonial type. Sitting in my saddle for an instant before I dismounted, a vision of lost glory passed before my mind. Vision of broad plantations, singing Negroes, aristocratic colonels, balls, dances, gallantry, all gone now.
So in this, that's a wonderful passage. In this passage, the main character is looking at the ruin of a house, and you can see what is happening here. Time has defeated civilization. Civilization is here just a simple memory, and even that will soon be gone. Then another way how Howard shows that civilization doesn't have a chance is by nature. He's describing scenes where nature retrieves actively, formally civilized space and turns it again into wilderness, like this passage.
The young pines had invaded the once generous lawn. The whole place wore an aspect of decay. Behind the manor, the barns and outhouses which once housed slave families were crumbling in ruin. The mansion itself seemed to totter above the litter, creaky, giant, rat-gnawed and rotting, ready to collapse at any untoward moment, or any untoward event. Excuse me.
And here once again, nature, slowly but unstoppable, is getting this formerly civilized outpost back, turns it into wilderness. So, and now we're coming to the fun part. When now a civilized person enters this kind of space, he will transform. he has to transform, because otherwise he won't survive the adventure. And Howard gives several interesting steps how this works. For example, like these two ones, the moment that civilized person enters the swamps, we find him the reawakening of instincts and fear of the supernatural. So let's think about it. Civilized person, does that one need an instinct? Okay, my instinct is to find beer, good beer. But otherwise then, you can survive without, you just watch whether the light turns red or green and you cross the streets. Everything is fine, or should be fine, if you're not running into an idiot driver. And fear of supernatural, well, who believes in ghosts nowadays, except my wife? Do you believe in ghosts? Well, whatever. So, okay, but let me just show you a beautiful example how Howard does that, the longer one from Buchanan.
The faint breeze dropped suddenly. The stillness became so intense it was like a physical impact. I paused, startled. It was as if some inner instinct had shouted warning. As I stood there, every fiber of me quivered in response to that subconscious warning. Some obscure instinct deep in my consciousness sensed peril, but as the man subconsciously senses the presence of the rattlesnake in the darkness, or the swamp panther crouching in the bushes, I drew a pistol, sweeping the trees and bushes, but saw no shadow or movement to betray the ambush I feared. But my instinct was unerring. What I sensed was not lurking in the woods about me. It was inside the cabin, waiting.
That is an absolutely powerful passage. Here, the civilized person would have just thrusted in his gun and crashed into that house. This guy, there are no warning signals like sounds or that he sees any movement. He just stands in front of this house and he senses there's something wrong. And because he trusts in his instincts, he doesn't run into this trap. That's absolutely wonderfully written, and that really shows Howard was definitely a great writer. Okay, coming to my next point. Second point, okay, we're in a church here, but okay, I do it anyway. Sexual temptation. Okay, I pixeled something. Okay.
But this quadroon girl was different from any I had ever seen. Her features were regular, as a white woman's, and her speech was not that common wench. Yet she was barbaric, and the open lure of her smile, and the gleam of her eyes, and the shameless posturing of her voluptuous body. Every gesture, every motion she made set her apart from the ordinary run of the woman. Her beauty was untamed and lawless, meant to madden rather than to soothe, to make a man blind and dizzy, to rouse in him all of the unreined passions that are his heritage from his ape ancestors.
Yes, here, this woman, she tries to, this swamp dweller, tries to lure that man, the outsider, the intruder, into a trap and uses her attraction. And the interesting part is here, the outsider, the civilized person, is actually pretty much attracted to that person. They have this kind of display of this forbidden yearning of the person from civilization to perhaps even be something like a barbarian. And in this scene, actually, okay, the story was written in the 1930s.
Ear to ear.
Okay, that was pretty graphic, R-rated, minors out of the room. Okay, too late. Okay.
Too late.
What? Too late, yes. I had to do this. No, okay, what we have here, this is really hardcore stuff. Here we have no chivalry, no gallantry. What is going on here is two guys who go at each other and they clearly know one of us is not going to leave here. And there's only one outcome to this. And naturally, both of them want to be the ones who leave. And so, especially the civilized person, that's the one who's actually winning that fight. In order to leave alive, he needs to forget everything he learned. You don't kick somebody who is on the floor. You don't do things like that. All the rules he or she learned are lost, gone, for one very single but decisive moment. And that's where Howard really shows, under the civilized layer, there is still this primeval self, this barbarian. And here comes the interesting part. That's really, really important to notice. Howard is not glorifying violence. Howard is not obsessed with depicting violence. That is really important because some moronic critics are always going like Howard, this guy was attracted to this stuff. Not true. Here he shows simply or very realistic the only way to survive if one gets into such an extreme situation. And that brings me back to the point where we say that barbarism is the natural state of mankind. But okay, I don't want to close here on violent note. Rather, once again, for Howard, barbarism was the natural state of mankind, and the barbarian.
Often he starved. When he feasted, it was with a mighty gusto, and the juices of food and strong drink were stinging wine to his palate.
Yes, for Howard, barbarism was, to put it in a nutshell, to live a fuller life and to enjoy life. And that is something Robert Howard himself yearned for, but perhaps never managed to have. And I think here at Howard Days, we are definitely celebrating life, enjoying ourselves, and are hereby honoring our favorite writer from Cross Plains. And that's what I think we should continue to do. And with this, I'm more or less finished. Thanks a lot, guys. And thanks for Mark Finn for
Okay. All right, thank you guys so much. We have some time for questions from the audience. Oh, Rusty's chomping at the bit.
I just got a quick one for Jason. I love that, and I have always thought of Dostoevsky as a metafictional narrative because it's written by a guy who is aware that he's writing a novel about a guy who's writing a novel who's aware of the novel he's writing. So it kind of keeps going. I don't think that the autobiographical aspects can totally be neglected because it's the framework that he hangs on, all the epistolary stuff. That's an actual letter from God. You came close to having my favorite quote from the novel, which is, as his book progressed, Steve realized that no publishing house in the world would buy it. It was too vague, too disconnected, too full of unexplained and trivial incidents, too much like life in a word. I've always loved it.
Yeah.
But are you aware of any precedent for that kind of self-awareness, that sort of self-referential narrative?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it sounds like almost like it's a proto-postmodernist novel. John Barth, not another name I can't pronounce, Nabokov, wrote a book called Pale Fire, where it's about a poem that he's working on, but then a lot of it is like the annotations of the poem, and so you're like reading it, but the kicker's writing it at the same time. So actually, it's not a precedent. It would be like, maybe.
You know, clearly
wants to say something.
We've always known he modeled it on Martin Eden. But,
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, Martin Eden by Jack London. But in Martin Eden and Jack London, it's again semi-autobiographical, but it doesn't show that same self-awareness on the part of the narrative.
That's
on the part of the character. So I've never run across anything prior to ours that had that element to it. So it's really, I hope you keep pursuing.
Bobby's doing a Horseshack over here. Yeah.
Sorry.
Arthur Mackin, The Hill of Dreams.
Still dreams?
Yeah, and very
Well, Mackin was one of Howard's favorite writers. So
I don't think he ever read it at that point, but it's very similar, and it has a lot of the same narrative focus, the young writer as a young man, very influential in Lovecraft and Henry Miller and Robert Bloch and a lot of others.
Yeah. What year was Post-Oaks written? 23, 4?
2029.
Oh, 2020. 29? Oh, between 20 and 29.
It covers the events from about 24.
Yeah. So Mackin stuff was being reprinted starting around 23, 24, 25. Yeah.
Well,
in the
there-
States. So maybe.
The time framing is questionable too, but or if Howard would have read them, but Joyce's Portrait of the Artist or Proust's Remembrance of Things Past.
Yeah.
No, I'm pretty sure. No, I'm pretty sure also, but Remembrance of Things Past.
Yeah.
I got two questions, one on the post-oak thing. I have not read
Use
it,
the
but
mic.
based on what I'm hearing,
Oh.
it sounds like Howard was also
So Jason.
writing about his fears,
Use the mic.
possible all the protection letters he got over time. It seems that even with Steve knowing the book's not going to sell, I think that's how saw a lot of his stuff, where he starts something, rip the paper out, start over, and it just seems to reflect on that based off what you guys have been saying, so maybe some of that was showing you there. And then my other question is, Mr. Guenther, I remember in one of the stories, forgive me, it's been a while since I read it, Conan's freed from some prison, and one of the aristocrats says to him, you know, you're the perfect person for what I need you to do. And Conan basically tells him, well, yeah, because you, as a civilized man, all you smell is your perfume bodies, and you don't see the dangers or understand them. You can be impolite to somebody, because if you're impolite to me, I'm going to smash your face in. I know I badly quoted that, but that seems to be how Howard saw a lot of things, where the barbarian could get away with something, whereas you and I, we'd never do it because we know there's a consequence behind it.
Yeah, civilization has these artificial laws which are basically to be just, but according to Howard, these laws were basically protecting those people who broke those laws. And basically those civilized laws were betraying civilization itself. That's exactly what...
And another thing on that, all the dead civilizations in Howard's work, from the lizard one all the way up to some of the ones called that phase, all seem believable. They seem like they hit their pinnacle and collapsed through their inertia or their own stupidity. And then you've got, here comes Call and the rest of them walking along trying to pick the pieces up, knowing they need something better, but not knowing what that better is.
Well, I think the message I've always gotten from Howard is that the real pinnacle, civilization, comes at that point where you're still building. You're still trying to achieve something better, something more civilized. And when you stop, when you say, we got to make, again, an inevitable slide. As soon as you start coasting.
Right. Just to add that briefly, because I think it's important for this discussion about barbarism and civilization. We tend to, when we talk about this, we talk about it as this dichotomy between the two. Really, it's a trichotomy, and how it's because there's another element to this that we often forget about, or we lump it in with barbarism, and that's the concept of savagery. Right? Now, this is today sort of more of a pejorative term, but in Howard's day, this was this division. Savagery, barbarism, civilization came from the idea of cultural evolution. From these are all now outdated anthropological ideas that we don't believe anymore, but they were current in the time. And that was the idea that evolution, just like physical, biological evolution, also could apply to cultures, and that cultures began in savagery, which would be equivalent to a hunter-gatherer society. When you get agriculture and you're starting to develop, that's barbarism. Right? That's you have metallurgy, agriculture. You're at that state. Civilization is when you have writing and culture and the arts and these sorts of things. And so this idea of cultural evolution meant that cultures themselves would move up this ladder and down this ladder, back and forth. And that's the idea Howard was playing with. And so when he talks about barbarism, as you very importantly pointed out, he's never saying that barbarism is better than civilization. He's saying barbarism is the natural state, right? So barbarism is that point of equilibrium between the two extremes of savagery and civilization. And so when you get a place like the frontier, right, it's not just the line between barbarism and civilization, it's the line between savagery and civilization. Barbarism is that line, right? It's that frontier, that liminal, that threshold space right there between the two. And so the barbarian is the person who can sort of navigate that space where those two extremes clash. The swamp, the wilderness, where civilization is encroaching into it, that line. And that's the idea that he's playing with, that you can move back and forth between these two extremes, and it's the barbarian that sort of navigates that path between the two. And so, I don't know, it's kind of my take on it. It's a movie.
Yes. I don't see that he is just a neutral observer here between civilization and barbarian. He has a point of view, and it ain't what civilization.
Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Just didn't get it. But what was
Oh, can you repeat the question one
Yes.
time?
Say he's not a neutral observer here. He's not just an observer and a describer. He is a participant in the drama himself. And in that, he definitely has a preference between civilization and barbarism, and I think definitely he prefers the barbarian.
Yeah, definitely sure. That's
Yeah.
definitely yes. Yeah, he's definitely that's perfect.
I don't know if I go that
At the
far.
very beginning, I want to know what you would think about the identity of the dark barbarian. Wouldn't it make more sense to kind of assign that to Brand McMorrin and Hicks, since that's sort of the even though in the earlier Ivorian stuff, the pics are an analog to Native Americans, as you get to the Brand McMorran historical fiction, even though the scholarship he used is outdated now, is where we know where they came from, they're still presented as this constant, especially in some of the Turlo O'Brien stuff and the Darkman stories, where you have two ostensible civilizations in the Irish and the Vikings fighting. He still puts the picks where they were in history between the Gaels and the Norse and the Danelaw. Would Brand McMorran make more sense to kind of focus on as the identity of the Dark Barbarian standing over everything?
Yeah, well, I think that's actually very on target. The Picts are depicted as being that more primitive type. I think without any doubt. Conan rises. The example I use with Conan in this, my beef, I guess, with the idea that that book from '84. And I mentioned, I do think it's seminal, but seminal things are supposed to grow other things, and things need to progress from that. I'm one of a number of folks who are trying to open up discussion, where not everything is cut and dried, and a mantra of let's accept this and everything's dark barbarism. I would disagree though personally with. Howard clearly says in a letter to Lovecraft, and I can't quote a chapter and verse, but he thinks that being a true barbarian in his sense of the worst form of that would be an awful state. He doesn't believe he could do it. In fact, he says in a few places he prefers to be in the civilized world he's in. G.K. Chesterton, who died the day after Howard, 1936. Coming from it from the glass half full point of view, he sees civilization as a great holding action, as an endless battle against the forces of chaos. That aware of that, the natural state of humanity, he's aware of kind of the same reality that Howard's talking about, but that Howard seems to emphasize. And Chesterton sees it sort of the other way around, that civilization's worth working for, that still rising toward the pinnacle before complacency. That complacency is what starts the beginning of the end. And I think that I see the whole thing, if I'm accurate in my historical overview, as a cyclical thing. It's a pendulum swing. So, but yeah, I agree with the Pictish.
I think he had another question. One question. I think you had one question more, sir, for him. Was that something? Okay, sir.
Cool, Scott.
Yeah, I'm curious about the genre confusion being a sign of social disruption and the Depression, I guess. And I can kind of see that. Are there other authors that you see that in around that time? Like who else in that time?
There's an obscure novel by, I probably don't need this microphone because you're sitting right there. There's a really obscure novel, I don't know if it's obscure, Tonobungo by H.G. Wells. Somebody read that? Like, he goes, at one point he's in a Zeppelin, at one point it's like a mansion, like a Victorian mansion story, at one point it's a science fiction, that's somebody in the laboratory trying to work on this tincture. And a lot of the scholarship that treats Tonobungo makes that same case, that it basically H.G. Wells got into an argument with Henry James, and there's it's a very similar, I don't know if it's similar, but it's an equally interesting correspondence where they argue like science fiction or realism. Henry James is like, oh, we should write about life, and then H.G. Wells of course like, no. Well, H.G. Wells finally says, I'm going to write a artful novel myself, and so he writes Tonobungo with the same sort of, and we could say that this is another interesting period because it was right at the end of the Edwardian period, approaching basically the Great War. So, I mean, a lot of people have pushed back against this. It's just a theory, right? Literary theory is always like this extremely speculative. But Frederick Jameson, who has this novel called The Political Novel, book of sociology of literature, where he makes this really intriguing case about genre confusion and political and economic reality. But some people have really, don't think it's because he's just speculating. He's not a scientist. He's just a literary critic.
Bobby, did you say something?
Just a note more than a question. I like both of your approaches, but I think you have to remember that Robert E. Howard is not static in any of his depictions. He's played around with a lot of different concepts.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think both of you do well to consider is Worms of the Earth, decadent Roman civilization, a decadent Pict culture,
Yeah.
and then something very unnatural, which is something you don't see very often in stories, but you get somebody that should be your bright barbarian that becomes your dark barbarian by the end.
We would all do better to consider Worms of the Oak. I mean, in many ways, I consider that Howard's just seminal masterpiece, in my opinion, for many of the reasons that you're illustrating there. A lot of these themes that we're talking about, a lot of the themes that were important to Howard and to his work, they're all encapsulated in Worms of the Earth, and in just a magnificent way. Yeah, I couldn't read more.
So I haven't read the letters, but I've read about them. What struck me most about Dr. Guenther's presentation was how similar some of the language was, although not maybe still using the word barbarian, using the word frontier, that the ambassador to China used in the 1930s to write letters to his friends. And I'm wondering maybe the antecedents of some of these ideas from Howard. Is this something about kind of a Frederick Jackson Turner view of the world? Is this about China, how we see barbarians reinventing China cyclically, the cyclical ideas that Frank was talking about? Or is this more recent history in the sense of World War I being the destruction of Western civilization, or the rise of the Nazis as being the rise of the end of Western civilization? I'm wondering where he's getting his ideas from. Is it something historical he's reading from the history books, or do you think he's getting it from contemporary culture? Like Jackson Turner's ideas are only 20 years old at the time, right?
You go.
You might answer.
No, definitely not Nazis.
What's that?
Definitely not the Nazis.
Definitely not the
They were
Nazis.
later.
Well, yeah. So how many people are familiar with Jackson Turner's work? And I'm somewhat familiar with the his work on the frontier and this idea of the America in expanding into the frontier. Give me again what your question was, because I wasn't expecting to have to answer it.
The ideas that are current at his time, the idea that
Yes.
World War I is the destruction of world civilization,
Right.
or maybe the rise of the Nazis, as he's seen that towards the end of his life, and the Jackson Turner idea, or is he looking back in his fiction, in his history books, like the fall of the Roman Empire, the fall of the Chinese Empire?
Oh, I think it's
over
all
and
of
over
those.
again?
Oh, it's all in
I
there.
think
Absolutely.
it's
Yes,
as well as
absolutely.
the-
Yes, absolutely.
But another important piece of that is talks with people
Sorry.
who had actually been pioneers.
Right.
Sure, and then interesting that that's the same story for this guy, the ambassador. He's from Oklahoma, and he's always talking about these frontier people and how they made America. So I was really struck by the language. And the interesting thing is, this guy was an educated man, highly educated. He's talking the same kind of language Howard is from a self-educated man. So I just found it very,
Yeah,
very
perhaps-
Just to say that this idea that Howard had that this was cyclical, right? The idea of falling and rising and falling and rising comes from the fact that he saw it in history. He was seeing it in his present day.
Okay.
I mean, so he was seeing it in this macro historical perspective. This idea, that's the way he saw the rise and fall of civilization. You rise up, as Rusty says, you stagnate, then you fall back down into savagery, back to barbarism, maybe find that equilibrium, moving up and down. That was how he viewed history, and it is because he was seeing it both in the past and probably in his current day, I think.
Perhaps one more thing that's quite interesting, because what Howard said, the view of barbarism is pretty much based on the frontier. Interestingly, he never says the pioneers were barbarians. In the letter, he claims they were specialists. That's also
He sneers at Lovecraft. You say we're barbarians.
Right.
Here's why. But he would have done us a big favor if he had differentiated barbarism and savagery.
That's right, and he doesn't do a good job of that.
Using the same word to mean both things.
He did, and to some degree, I think he probably expected his audience to kind of understand those distinctions, because that was something that was a bit more current in his time than it is today. Just to add that the other crisis is, of course, the Great Depression,
Sure.
too, where civilization seems to be collapsing all around them, and the institutions of civilization, the banks and things like this, are all failing. And there's this deep suspicion of those institutions, happening at that time as well. All right, right there, yes.
It said one thought on whether his influences are old or new. Every writer takes from every source they have, but a lot of the newer influences might be pushed in his work because Howard understood his audience, and after a while he understood what sold. So even if he didn't follow a certain belief, if that belief was going to sell and make him money, that belief would end up in his work and be displayed somehow. So it's not all about what was going through his head. It was also going on what would go into his wallet.
Yeah. I think that's true to some degree.
Howard, more so than most cult writers, had to be himself personally involved in the story.
Yes.
And I think he
really couldn't talk about that.
and he goes through periods where he is writing more commercially than others. There's some periods where I think he is beyond that point, especially towards the end of his career. I think when you see some of his most literary fiction with Beyond the Black River and Red Nails and some of these where he's really working on getting his ideas in there because he's an established writer by this point. He's not worried about Farnsworth Wright rejecting one of his Conan stories, so he's able to get beyond that. I think we have time for one more question if anyone's out there. And if not,
Where can we actually buy a copy of Footsteps in Sand Rust?
That's an excellent question. I get a chance to plug the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press now. It's only been published one time by Donald Grant in 1990, I believe, and it's a fairly, it's not super difficult to obtain, but it's a fairly expensive volume. It runs around $100.
It's on Book
We'll see. Oh, is it where?
It's on Book Finder.
Yeah, it's on Book Finder. You can find it online. But it's the next volume, correct? Or should be?
That's the theory.
Okay.
If we can get some people off their butts.
Coming soon.
Yes, so the next volume that will be available from the Robert E. Howard Foundation Press is going to be Post Oaks and Sand Rust, along with a number of other biographical writings and autobiographical writings, all in one volume.
Let me know if I can help make that happen.
Yes. And then, do we have a tentative end of the year, maybe, or early next year, roughly? No promises?
I'm actually the holdup, so.
Oh, okay. Well, we know where you need to, we know who you need to push over there. Okay, last one.
Or he actually wants to buy it, he could go to his library.
Oh, well, you can probably check it out. That's true. Oh, that's true. You can always check it out from the library. Okay. Well, on that note, we have to wrap it up. Thank you all so much for coming out. We very much appreciate it. How about a round of applause?